This is step 1C of assignment 4. And so what you're supposed to have out is your literary toolbox to observe specific forms, and then your ultimate guide to Bible study questions. This is also in your manual. But this is just giving you an idea of what kind of questions to bring to the text. So all of these things, you should have an idea of what you're already looking for. These should be in your mind, and then you go through and read again. So I'm going to show you how to do that. All right, so I start from the beginning. Typically, it's helpful to just observe or see one part at a time. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So going through the first part here. So I'm in Jonah 1:1. You can see I've already observed a little. So what I've added, I marked locations in green. This I actually did at an earlier step in assignment 3 when I was doing historical background, because I knew I wanted to look at where these places are. And then I added a map. So I found out that so over here, you see a little map of Israel. So you have the temple here. Jonah gets on a boat and he goes to Tarshish, which is way over here. So I think that's kind of interesting. Then I noticed a repeated word. So the author kept using the word down. So he went down to Joppa. He went down into the ship. Then he went down into the inner part of the ship. And then he lays down and goes to sleep. So the author is very clearly repeating something. Whenever something's repeated, I like to do it in red. Another thing that I want to do is, because this is a story and it has very specific characters, is I have a little color key. So I made a little key. I'm going to mark anything that God does in orange, Jonah in blue, the sailors, the Ninevites, that's all going to be in this like pink color. So that just helps me follow with what's going on. So I'm going to start in the second verse. So the Lord hurled a great wind. So that's something God is doing. I think that's interesting. Mighty tempest. So this is just fitting in, mighty. That's an addition or word that's like, we're speaking to this like irony and satire found in Jonah. I think that's building on that. So the mariners were afraid. So I want to do mariners afraid, and they each cried out to his God. So lowercase God, definitely in contrast to the Lord. So this reflects, worship of different gods. And they hurled the cargo in the ship, lighting it for them. But Jonah gone down, lay down fast asleep. So, irony. Jonah asleep. So, I'm just labeling that. So the captain came and said to him, what do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish. So this is interesting. Lowercase God, not speaking of Yahweh. So clearly the mariner, he definitely is along the lines of, just the ancient religions, multiple gods, and territorial gods. So you can see that he's worried. Most likely, probably he thinks that the God of the sea is angry. So, and then they said to another, come, let us cast lots so we know on whose account this evil has come upon us. Okay, evil also is repeated here. I'm just going to circle that. Evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So Jonah is blue. They said to him, tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. So I'm going to circle evil again. What is your occupation? Where do you come? What is your country? What have people? And then he said, I am a Hebrew. I fear the Lord, the God of heaven. Okay, so that's cool. Who made the sea and the dry land. Okay, that is ironic. He's running. So basically I'm making a little note here. That's ironic because God made the sea and he's running from God. Who made sea? Then the men were exceedingly afraid. Okay, so once again, just this emphasis, afraid, and said to him, what is this you have done? For the men knew he was fleeing the presence of the Lord because he had told them. So they're clearly freaking out. Then he said to him, what shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. So yeah, just speaking of the story, like just rising intensity, I can just picture it. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. So you have Jonah now saying, pick me up and hurl me into the sea. So I'm going to just do that, underline. So this is what Jonah's saying, so I'm underlining it in blue. Nevertheless, the men rowed back to get to dry land. So the men rowed back to get to dry land. So one of the questions I'm coming to mind, right? This is a story. So the questions on the sheet, and it's like, okay, what's happening that shouldn't be happening? What is the dialogue going on? What is the author sharing about the characters? And man, a lot of stuff, like Mariner's response is to row harder. Like Mariner's response, row harder. Like compare character with Jonah. So I'm seeing a lot of comparisons here. So therefore they called out to the Lord, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." Okay, this is fascinating because they are actually, so I notice here the mariners, they call out to their gods. So see this, they're calling out to their gods, call out to the God, and then they call out to the Lord. So they're calling out to Yahweh. So there's something that Jonah has done where he's actually introduced them to Yahweh, and they're now talking to Yahweh and praying to Yahweh. So then they picked up Jonah, so they being the mariners, they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from his raging. Okay, so definitely a somewhat of a, like, I'm thinking plot, so somewhat of a resolution. So just a little question mark. I'm just tracking with the story here. And then it says, then the men, so that's the mariners, feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. So this is fascinating, that they come to the Lord. And then I also notice a contrast. So I remember here, so the mariners are afraid. What are they afraid of? So I'm going to say, okay, afraid of sea. And then this is contrasting with over here, feared the Lord. Fear Lord, not sea. So this is just a fascinating story, with the tides turning and these men first calling out to their own gods, and then here, okay, and then, but we're not done yet. So one more verse. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. So you see here, Lord appointed a great fish, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish. So I think this is kind of like the last down, so almost like down to death. So I see this like real journey that Jonah has taken, physically, but also I think spiritually. So we're starting to get, okay, maybe what is the author communicating? But we have, down, 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 down. And then now he's down in the belly of the fish, which basically is death. So it's like he was in a deep sleep, and then now he's even down to death. Like, how much further down can you go? And then Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So that is an example of me observing this passage. It's really good to stop after each segment because there's so much going on and you've built momentum. So you might even already tell, like, I'm kind of ready to start being like, okay, why did the author communicate in this way? What was he intending to communicate? So I feel like I'm at a good point where I could pause. I mean, I could really observe all day, but I think this is a good point to stop at. And then now I'm going to go back through and do step 2, which is understanding. So I'll show you how to do that in the next video.